Welcome to 755 Live, about 5 minutes of what Jesus said. You can find a different command of Jesus every weekday at our Bible plan. Go to bible.today.church and check that out. A lot of cool resources there. Today's Jesus said is stick with me. It's from John 15, verse 4, where he says, "Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit unless it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me." I think I read that wrong. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. In context here in John 15, 1 through 8, Jesus talks about that he is the true grapevine, that the Father is the gardener, and then the Father cuts off every branch that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit so that they will produce even more. And he tells his disciples that they had already been pruned, they had already been trimmed up by the message, by the words that he has given them. And he goes on to say in verse 5 that he is the vine and that we are the branches. And if we remain in him, we will produce much fruit. And he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Then verse 6, he gives something that's really a warning. He says, anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. But if you remain in me and my words remain in you, he says in verse 7, you can ask anything you want and it will be granted. And when you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples, and this brings great glory to my Father. Now, the context here is this is right after the Last Supper, some of the last teaching Jesus gave before his crucifixion. And Jesus is clearly stating here that he alone is the vine, the source for those who believe in him, and that we are attached to him, the vine, by faith, but also for a purpose, to bear fruit. And if we don't, the Father cuts us off. I mean, did you get that? Bearing fruit isn't optional. It's a direct result of being connected with Jesus. Jesus said, stick with me. No fruit, no connection. No connection, no fruit. If you've ever grabbed hold of like an extension cord that's frayed, that has a wire exposed, you've felt the power of 120 volts of electricity. I've never seen anyone come into contact with 120 volts without having an immediate and noticeable reaction, to say the least. Now, can you just consider for a minute that we are connected to Jesus, the true vine, connected to the very power that created the entire universe? How can we be plugged into that kind of power and there be no change? Well, you can't. But somehow we have this crazy idea that we can be connected to Jesus and not bear fruit. But Jesus said, if you remain in me, if you stick with me and my words remain in you, that we would bear much fruit. And when we bear much fruit, we are truly his disciples. And it doesn't make us look better. It doesn't give us the glory. It brings great glory to the Father. Well, what does that fruit look like? How can we tell that we are bearing that kind of fruit, that we're actually connected to the vine? Jesus told us his very words are how we bear fruit. It's not an option. When we obey what he says, Jesus produces the fruit in our lives. And it's like grabbing hold of that electricity. You can't be in the vine without being changed. Jesus said, stick with me. And if we remain in him, we will bear much fruit. So what kind of fruit are we producing? Are we really plugged in to Jesus. Stick with me, is what Jesus said. How can we put that into action today?